Cheyenne with Wise Out Apothecary. Thank you so much for joining me yet again for another month of the Herb of the Month Club. This month for November we are studying the wild rose plant, particularly the fruits of the wild rose plant, which are rose hips, which are these little red guys here. One of the things I wanted to go over is to make sure that you have the right plant ID. So in the winter, there's obviously not any flowers, there's not many leaves left on here, so the fruit is really what we kind of go by, and the branches of the plant as well. So some of the things that you want to look for, of course, are the big bristles on the side. There should be all up and down the plant. The fruit is like an orangey red color. It can sway a little bit between true orange and true red, but I find most often it's this kind of orangey red color. At this time of the year, they will start to shrivel a little bit and kind of wither, which is okay. It's actually just drying out a little bit, and this is rose hip season. So everybody thinks that rose hip season is when the rose hips first come out, which is in the summertime. And that is not true. The rose hips need to be frozen a couple times with a good couple frosts before they are ready. So that can be mimicked in your freezer at home, but it is not the natural course of things, so it's not going to have the same nutritional potency as if you wait to get it off of the shrub. This is my favorite time of the year to harvest because it is so full of vitamin C, and vitamin C, of course, is hard to come by in the winter. So there's no reason for anyone with rose hips around to ever get scurvy or any sort of vitamin C deficiency because they are here, abundant everywhere. So what else we want to look at is to see if we can find any of the old leaves. That is also a really good indicator of whether or not we have the correct plant. So actually, right here, we have some of the old leaves. One of the things you might be able to see is that it is pinnately divided. An important thing to note if the flowers are on there is that all wild rose varieties have 5 petals. Excuse me, with the 5 petals, it is important that if you're going to forage them or harvest them at all, that you leave 1 or 2 on every flower so that the flower can still be pollinated. Petals are kind of the advertisement saying, hey, this plant is ready to be pollinated, come pollinate me. Sort of like wearing a red dress on a date night. So it's just kind of like, hey, I'm ready to go. So that is something that you need to take into consideration. If it's in flower and you just kind of gently touch it and all the petals just fall off, that actually means that it has already been pollinated, so you don't need to worry about that, and you can take all of the petals from a pollinated flower. It's pretty hard to go wrong in terms of edibility with the wild rose. Just about every facet of the plant is edible to a degree. There, of course, are tastier areas than others, so the flowers are very delicious, especially the petals. Candied rose petals is amazing. The rose hips are super tasty. I actually really like the taste of the leaves as well. I find they have a really mild rose flavor in amongst the kind of greens taste, which I love. Wild rose does have the nickname Itchy Bum Berry for good reason, and that is because in the hips, when you open them, they have these little hairs that surround the white, have these little white hairs that surround the seeds, and those hairs are actually to protect the plant from being eaten. So let's see if we can get a close-up shot here. Here is, I opened up one of the rose hips and there's the seeds and the little hairs on there. Those little hairs have earned this berry the nickname Itchy Bum Berry. Funny, I know, but it is accurate. So Itchy Bum Berry comes into play when you eat a whole bunch of whole rose hips. So if I were to just eat this and then eat maybe like another handful of them, it is literally like itching powder on the way out. So avoid that, and also understand that if you need some backwoods itching powder for whatever reason, you can get some from these little tiny hairs. So as long as you remove those hairs, what I like to do is actually just kind of scoop out the seeds on site of where I'm harvesting. The idea is that hopefully the seeds will produce a new plant or two along the way. The seeds are edible, but I don't generally use them. I'd rather see them grow into a new plant. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cold, but I knew I had to come out and film today because it's such a beautiful day. So this is empty rosehip flesh. This is edible in on its own, and I absolutely would love to snack on this. It'll help my sore throats and everything today as well. The flavor is so good this time of year. If you have ever eaten a rosehip and you're like, oh, that's nothing to write home about, that's because you haven't eaten it in season yet. So I find it tastes mildly like an orange, with like a hint of rose. It's hard to explain, but it's super tasty. So, big difference between wild rose and cultivated roses, especially in floral arrangements. The roses that are made in floral arrangements undergo heavy chemical processing to make sure that they are so pretty and beautiful and perfect and pristine. Not so good for the belly, so eating those ones is not recommended. I also recommend knowing your land that you're harvesting from. I say that all the time. Make sure you have permission to harvest. And talking with the landowner is important because they may use pesticides, they may use herbicides, excuse me, and things like that around the roses, and you don't want to be eating that, obviously. So wild roses out in the wilderness are probably one of the kind of cleanest, most nutritional sources of it, but it can be grown in the city, it can be grown in your yard. You just have to give it the correct growing conditions. Yeah, so basically the rose hips can help stay hydrated. They're giving large amounts of vitamin C. And actually one of my favorite uses for it that I use quite frequently, I do lead plant walks all year round, even in the winter. And for anyone that's experienced snow blindness before, a warm cup of rosehip tea, and if you're just doing tea or soup, you can use the whole rosehips. You don't need to remove the seed. But if you make a warm cup of rosehip tea and soak a cloth in that and lay that over your eyes, you don't want it scalding hot. You don't want to add a burn to snow blindness, but just nice and soothing and comfortable, and put that over the eyes for about 15-20 minutes, and you should have significant relief. So I've used that time and time again in the winter, and I've also used it in the summer when there's too much hot sun on the eyes, and it's very irritating and drying, and it gets like a headache in there, so not a good feeling, and definitely the rose hips help with that. So, just to summarize everything, the wild rose plant has 5 petaled flowers. It has bristly branches. A lot of people call them thorns, but they're bristles in this case. It has orangish red fruit. The flowers range from light pink, almost white, to true, almost hot pink. The leaves are pinnately divided. And it grows quite readily all over Alberta, which is fitting, seeing as it's been the Alberta official flower since 1930. So it makes sense. So thanks so much for joining me for our introduction video to the wild rose plant, Rosa acicularis. Sorry. I'm a dyslexic, so I mix up all my Latin names a lot. But thanks so much for joining me. We'll be back again for December for our next round, and thanks so much for having me. Have a good day.